it's me, Audrey. So this is going to be an updated how I edit my Instagram photos video since this was highly requested, and I do edit a bit differently now. Starting off with my cameras, there are 3 different ones I've used over the last 2 years, the first of which is my phone. I currently have the Pixel 2 XL, and before I had the first generation Pixel XL. The camera is outstanding for either phone in my opinion, so I love using the Pixel whenever I want to get in a really quick snap of something. The second camera that I have is the first DSLR I ever learned how to use, and it's the Canon Rebel T5. My favorite lens to use with this is my 50mm f1.8. This is a fixed lens with a wide aperture, and if you don't know that much about cameras, that just means that you can't zoom in and out using this lens, and it produces that blurred out background effect behind your subject. I also have an 18 to 55mm zoom lens that I can use whenever I want a wide angle shot, but I prefer using my 50mm lens overall. Since this is kind of bulky, heavy to carry around, and definitely a beginner's DSLR, I eventually upgraded to the Sony a6000, and it's the camera that I'm currently filming with. The lens is a fixed 35mm f1.8, and I always have it with me wherever I go because it's easy to travel with, and I love the way it photographs and films. Getting onto the photo editing tutorial, I'm going to show you guys step by step how I edit on my phone. I only use one app to edit my photos, and that is Adobe Lightroom for mobile. I will use the desktop version when I'm working on more intense photography projects, but my Sony is able to transfer photos directly from camera to phone, so when I want to post something instantly, I just prefer it this way. So opening up Lightroom, I have an album here with some shoe photos I imported and took with the 3 different cameras I mentioned before. Opening up the photo to the very right is a photo my husband snapped with me while we were walking along the street. We found some leaves I thought were festive. I'm going to tap on the drop down at the top left and click on the info so you can see some details about this photo. You can see here that it's a JPEG taken with my Canon Rebel T5 using the wide angle lens I talked about before. I think this camera was really great for me and my husband to learn on because we didn't know anything about cameras at the time we bought it. Moving on to the middle photo, this is actually a photo I snapped with my phone. Opening up the info again, it's a JPEG and you can see that it's shot on my Google Pixel 2 XL. I love the camera on this phone because it has a f1.8 aperture lens, which just means it allows more light into a photo. It's really nice in low light situations and the photos come out really sharp. The last photo is the photo I'm going to show you the actual editing process with because this is the camera I use for the majority of my photos. I edit every single photo differently, but there are some consistencies between each edit that make my photos look the way they do. You can see under the info, this is a raw image shot on my Sony with my 35mm lens. The photo itself is something my husband and I worked on for a boot company, so the shoes are the focus. I'm just going to get right into how I would edit this if I were to post it on Instagram, and the first thing that I always start off with is cropping. I like my photos shot in portrait, or vertically I guess, as opposed to landscape. I'm always looking at my photos on my phone, and I just prefer them this way because it fills up my phone screen. Now when I shoot with this camera, the aspect ratio is 2:3, and Instagram only allows portrait photos at 4:5, so I'm going to crop it at that aspect ratio so I know exactly what I'm going to see when I post. The next thing that I do is I will open up the tab that says Light and tap on the button that says Curve on the right. Now I'm not going to get too in depth about what this is because that could be a whole other video on its own. So the short version is that this little graph looking thing represents the tones in a photo. More specifically the lightness and darkness in particular areas of an image. You can see these 4 dots at the bottom, and I only ever touch this white one. The other red, green, and blue options would edit the tones for those color channels specifically, but I personally like to stick to white so I'm not messing with the colors just yet. The graph is split into 4 sections from left to right. The left representing the shadows and the darkest portions of an image, and the right representing the highlights or the lightest areas of an image. I want to control each point or section of the tones, so I start by tapping and placing a point along the line at each intersection of the graph. Once that's done, I start moving the points to represent more of an S shape as opposed to a straight line. I do this randomly until it looks pleasing to my eye, so you can adjust this however you would like. This S-curve is a pretty common technique, I think. Pretty much just makes the darker areas darker and the lighter areas lighter. To give my photo kind of faded look to it, I will raise the leftmost point a little bit. Doing this kind of mimics the appearance of a lot of vintage looking phone app filters, so this is how you would recreate that effect if you're going for that kind of vibe. I'll continue to move around each point until my curve resembles a slight S. I like the way this looks, so I'm just gonna hit done. This right here is my baseline for every single photo I edit. Once I've done this, I move on to the effects panel and I increase the clarity because I feel like I can see the details of the textures in my photos a lot more clearly. This does tend to darken the photo a bit, so I will go back to the light panel and adjust to brighten that up a bit more. Here I'm just editing the contrast, shadows and such, and this is pretty much exactly what I was doing in the tone curve earlier, just in a different way, where everything is labeled and numbered instead of playing with the graph. The step is always different for me, the settings are never the same, so I would recommend just messing around with it. Try adjusting each slider and finding out what works for you. That's all I'm doing here, just testing out each one and seeing if it enhances the image to my taste. After that, I'll move on to the color panel, and this particular image looks a little too blue for my taste, so I will drag the temperature to the right to warm it up. If the photo was too yellow in my opinion, I would do the exact opposite and drag it to the left. Next, I thought the photo had a little too much pink in it, so I dragged the tint to the left so it looked a little more green. Again, if it looked more green to me, I would drag the tint to the right to look more pink. If you want to get more specific with the colors, you can tap the mix button on the right, which will open up a spectrum of colors to play around with. I'm going to start with orange, and if you watch me mess around with the hue slider, you can see that dragging this to the right makes the oranges look more yellow, and dragging it to the left makes the oranges look more red. Underneath that, the saturation slider manipulates the intensity of this color, which I'm going to increase for this photo. And last of all, the luminance represents how dark or light this color will be, which I wanted to decrease. You can go through and do this for each color, and again, I just randomly go throughout and start messing with the settings until it looks right to me. Total personal preference. After I'm done with colors, I might go back and adjust some settings I've already adjusted, but the finishing touch on most of my photos, not all of them but most, is increasing the vignette amount in the effects panel. I like to do this because it darkens the edges, and for me that just kind of brings the focus towards the center of my image. Underneath that is a slider labeled midpoint, which if you mess around with that, you can see that it adjusts how far away that vignette is from the corners of the image. To save this edit to my phone, I'll tap on the 3 dots at the very top right corner and hit Save to Device. You have the option of saving it to the highest available quality, but since it's just for Instagram, I'll limit the size of it. I like to see what the photo is going to look like on my feed before I post it, so I have an app called Preview, which is just a place where I can upload my photos and see what they'll look like beside one another before putting them into Insta. I hit the plus sign in the right top corner, hit library, and I pick the photo I just edited. I like the way that this photo looks all together with the rest of my photos, but if it looked kind of off to me, I would go back into Lightroom and make some adjustments until I was happy with what I saw. So that is going to be it for my How I Edit My Instagram Photos tutorial. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and found it helpful for editing your own photos. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye!